People who watch security cameras for a living, what creepy things have you tried to forget? Was watching CCTV footage of a parking deck, and on the 9th level there's this guy sitting in the middle of the deck, banging his head on one of the pillars. All of a sudden the guy just stops and runs to the edge. Without stopping or jumping, he flings himself over the edge. I immediately called dispatch and told them what had happened. Few days later I was offered counseling for those events. I'm glad you were. A lad I grew up with worked security at a large shopping mall. Security get radioed to a jumper. He is first on scene. Blood everywhere. Body in a complete state. After emergency services left the scene, they washed down the bus access road, and he was ordered back to work. He wasn't offered counseling or a day off to gather his thoughts. I hope you're doing better now. I work in a retail store, and for a while I worked security here. Watching the security cameras wasn't technically my job, but we were consistently short-handed in that department and the manager was grooming me for promotion, so I got to fill in and watch the cameras occasionally. One day when we were reviewing footage from overnights, we saw this teenager calmly set down his shopping basket, take off his hat and glasses, and just charge at a wall. Hit it head on. He did this 2 more times. When he was done, his face was a bloody mess, and he put his hat and glasses back on and just left. Weirded me right the hell out. I used to do IT support for a charity that supplied housing and support for homeless people. A large proportion also had mental health issues, so there were a fair amount of interesting events that happened. Being in IT, I avoided experiencing most of it firsthand, though I was threatened with being stabbed on about my 3rd day. Anyway, I come in one Monday, and there's an email labeled urgent, saying there was an incident at the stairwell of one of the properties on Sunday night, and could I pull the relevant CCTV footage and put it on a DVD. I had to do this fairly frequently. I skip through the footage, find the incident, usually a fight or blatant drug dealing, and burn it to DVD for the police. The email never mentioned what the incident was, so I skip through the footage and watch as a clearly very agitated man ties a rope around a stair rail at the top of the stairs. Then his neck looks over the rail and then just casually tips forward over it. The rope flipped him round and he dangled there twitching for far too long before he just stopped. So yeah, that was a fun Monday. Wasn't a security officer, but I worked at a 24/7 gas station for a while. One night my co-worker accidentally killed himself while at work, and I made the mistake of watching the footage. He went to the back of the store with a bag of drugs, probably cocaine, snorted it and started acting funny for about 10 minutes. He then sits in the back office and gets fidgety/thrashing around until finally he just goes limp in the chair. He had died of a heart attack and sat there for 5 hours before anybody came in. Thought the absence of an employee was strange and called the cops. It was really weird seeing people come in and act all essy for the lack of service. They'd just leave thinking someone was lazy. But nah, dude was dead. I used to work loss prevention for a big box store. We had a lady get arrested for public indecency and I was asked to investigate. I had to follow her backwards from the point of arrest, and it was a trip to say the least. She arrived at the store swerving and nearly hitting several cars. She entered the store with 2 young children, both of whom are mentally handicapped. That lady literally dragged those kids around the store, slapping them and tugging at their ears/collars if they didn't obey. At some point she just abandons them in the clothing section, walks through the back doors to the break area, and I'm assuming she thought it was the bathroom because she proceeds to pull down her pants and it's all over the fire exit door. She pulls her pants up, without wiping mind you, and goes back to the floor like nothing happened. Someone saw what she did and followed her. Luckily there's an officer in the store at the time and quickly approaches her when the associate tells him what she did. Needless to say, she was definitely high and or drunk and was arrested. The scary part is, she did not mention those kids not one time. It wasn't until I reviewed the tape that I saw they were just still waiting by the shopping cart completely oblivious and afraid to move. Child services was later called, and I still think about those kids often. Breaks my heart to think about the bullshit those kids must still be going through. Not for a living, but I have had security cameras for the last 10 years at my house. A guy was shot 7 times in front of my house, but I only caught the audio. I've had random people walk around the front of the house looking for anything to steal and actually stealing it several times. Countless instances where people come up to break into my car until they realize the motion light kicks on and we have cameras. Most of the time people breaking into cars have a large tool bag over their shoulder. It's so amazing about the number of times people come up to my house doing weird it. If I didn't have the cameras I wouldn't know about hardly any of this it. One pro tip for anyone installing cameras, make sure you put lots of signs saying that there is video surveillance, otherwise you just end up with a lot of footage of people stealing stuff. Not security cameras per SE, but I had a SOC type job monitoring corporate internet usage. We had an image inspector watching people's web traffic, and it would throw up questionable images that someone on the network downloaded onto the big SOC screen. Being a medical related company, there were a lot of breast cancer type traffic that would throw off the porn detectors, which is why we watched in real time. One time I was sitting at the desk overnight, nobody should have been working, and suddenly the SOC screen turned into a wall of graphic child porn. Some genius took his laptop home, VPN'd into work, and started browsing so as to avoid being caught by his ISP. He's in prison now. This incident is a large part of why I no longer do that kind of work or corporate forensics. They make it sound like it's all catching hackers and espionage, but in reality, it's mostly looking at other people's porn. I used to do asset protection for a WAMAD in a very heroin addicted area. The creepiest thing was seeing how fast someone would go from completely normal to absolutely out of it in the span of a year because of the drug. You could build a timeline of their demise through CCTV pictures and video. One man in particular really stood out to me. The first time I apprehended him, he was very polite and intelligent, just stealing to get his fix. A year later, and the fourth time I caught him, he was basically a shell of a man. He tried running from me, and I looked him right in the eyes and said, "I know you. Gary last name, please don't run." The look on his face of someone knowing him who he couldn't even remember will always stay with me. I reviewed the security cameras around my office building. The cameras only monitor the outside of the building. We have signs posted everywhere stating cameras are watching. You get accustomed to certain movement patterns and activation of cameras, so I don't have to review the whole day's activity, just the parts that show things out of the ordinary. For a while, homeless people were using an hour behind landscaping to kick back and smoke drugs. Marijuana, heroin off foil, glass meth pipes, you name it. It's all in full view of one of the cameras. Watched a few drug sales there too. However, the most disturbing by far was the sex. Basically, guys would take the homeless women to that area and do any number of weird and wonderful things. The weirdest of all was when some dude lay on the ground and a drug slinging / homeless woman sat on a bench looking at her phone. He slipped off her flip flop and started sucking off her toes. He took short breaks intermittently to hit a glass meth pipe, then went back to work on the toes. This went on for about 45 minutes, then they left. We systematically found almost all the homeless porn stars during the day and told them our place has cameras and not to come back. Things have been quiet for a few years now. My time to shine. My first job out of college was working for a biggest security company, think worldwide big. I was doing electrical engineering and security system design for them. One of the first assignments I had was assisting in writing a report about a security system for a nuclear storage facility we had designed that had been infiltrated by nuns. No joke. Basically, the facility got invaded by octogenarian nuns who started covering the nuclear storage facility in blood they had conveniently provided in water bottles. The footage was jarring in quite a few ways. I used to do IT support for a company that had a lot of heavy machinery moving around inside a big warehouse type area. This giant front end loader would scoop up material and dump it into a hopper. Along the sides of the floor were these huge concrete barriers. I've heard them called Jersey barriers and Mayfair blocks, but they are about 10 feet tall. And this one guy's life was ended when the front end loader inadvertently scooped the base of the barrier and landed on one of two guys walking shoulder to shoulder through the plant. I was tasked to review the footage, then make copies, 6 of them, to be exact, and then ensure that the footage worked and was self-executable and able to be run from a USB stick. so I had to watch the footage of this guy get killed over a dozen times. I too was offered counseling for just watching the video. I used to work IT at a university, and last Easter we had a break-in. We found the footage of the guy going in at 2 PM, leaving at around 3, and not really taking anything. Fast forward to 7 PM and the guy comes back in, and is walking around the auditorium till 6 AM the next morning. In that time he proceeded to strip into his underwear, steal and wear a mask the Japanese exchange students made for the teacher, and smoke a red ton. He managed to steal 6 full bags of random items. We've dubbed him as the Jack-Off Bandit.